What's up, fight fans? This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Chris Eubank Jr. and Eddie Hearn. Get this. Recapping from the press conference yesterday, the final press conference before the big day, the weigh-ins today, the fights tomorrow, okay? And I witnessed Chris Eubank Jr. once again do something that a lot of people weren't able to do. And that's shut up Eddie Hearn, then call him a weasel. Then call him out on his bluff for a bet that Eddie had no rebuttal for. And it was crazy because Eddie couldn't put up the money for the bet, and it just shows you the confidence oozing from Chris Eubank Jr. You know, and we already know that Chris Eubank or Conor Ben on each side claim that it will not go the distance. There will be no decision. It will be action. It will be knockout, TKO, one of those, okay? And I do think that Eddie has been silenced, and it's crazy, you know. And I know Chris Eubank, he's on the top bill, you know. Him and Ben Shalom are leading the show right now. Conor Ben, you know, him and his dad and Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith and those guys, and he shut Frank Smith up too. So he was like, well, you think Eddie wasn't gonna get, you really not gonna get any credibility or any word in, you know. And I never heard that before. And the crazy thing is, normally if something's supposed to go a certain way, the committee or the host or hostess would come in and say, well, hey, Chris, can you still will you allow him to talk? And he was like, no, it's either me or Conor talk, not Eddie. Eddie's not going to talk. He's a weasel. Like I said, you know, and this stemmed from him calling Frank Sauerland, Eddie, all of them scumbags. All of them. Scumbags. Scumbags. That's what he called them. And him saying scumbag to weasel to these things like that, you know, it just shows you that Chris is on fire, but he's on fire passively. You know what I mean? Because he's like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow you to talk. I've never heard a fighter shut up the opposing promoter's mouth, especially Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn's one of the biggest. You know, he doesn't have the best track record lately since the 5 versus 5 and the Anthony Joshua fall from grace and all that stuff that happened lately. But he is one of the top promoters there. You know, I definitely have him over Oscar De La Hoya. And Oscar De La Hoya has his place, and he's done a lot for the sport as well. But Eddie is, you know, I think he's a notch above Oscar De La Hoya at this point. But to hear him, or should I say, for him to be silenced by Chris Eubank Jr. is showing something very, very special. And you got to keep in mind, this is Chris Eubank Jr. by himself. He don't have his dad. He doesn't have, you know, Senior in his corner, you know, calling the shot. So maybe it was a good decision. Maybe it was, you know, because if it meant him running the show, if it meant him slapping Conor with the egg, boosting the fight out the wazoo, you know, if it's him having the freedom to tell Eddie Hearn to shut up because we don't want to hear you talk, I'm not going to hear you talk, I say so be it. I say, hey, it was a good call by Chris Eubank Jr. because he's being his own man, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, a lot of fighters had to do that. Roy Jones Jr., Sugar Shane Mosley, not really Trinidad. Trinidad was pretty much a, you know, he kept it solid, you know, with his father, you know. But a lot of people had to leave the shadow of their fathers, and sometimes you got to do that. And I think this is the time for him to do that. And to keep in mind with Chris Eubank Jr., he's a guy that he's had what, 3 or 4 fights away from his dad. He was with Roy. You know, because you just need your trainer. And, you know, being with Chris Eubank Sr. had his advantages, but it also had his challenges. I'm not going to call it disadvantages, but his challenges when it came to senior being senior. You know what I mean? So I do think though, this is very interesting. This fight promises a lot. I will be live for the weigh-in, which starts here in a little bit. So you guys stay tuned. You guys tell me what you think of Chris Eubank Jr. shutting up Eddie Hearn. Probably the first man to do it. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunch. Peace!